Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. I'm going to be talking about board games today, as I think pretty much anybody that follows this channel knows. I do like my board games, and the Nintendo Switch has seen quite a few good ones released recently. Rather than do individual videos on each of them, because frankly I haven't got the time, I thought what I'd do would be to collate a couple of the highlights that have been released in recent weeks and give you a sense of what each of them are like. I have got reviews for most of these on DDNet as well if you want to read my more in-depth thoughts, but by watching this video you'll get a sense of some of the highlights of the digital board games that have been released on Nintendo Switch recently. So the first game I want to highlight is called Startups. Now, Startups is part of a collection of 4 games under the Oink Games collection, and all 4 of those games are excellent and well worth your time. But for me, Startups is the favorite because it works perfectly well as a single-player game against the AI. It works really well in multiplayer as well, and it just appeals to me in terms of the way that it plays. In Startups, your goal is to become the monopoly owner of as many different companies as possible. There are 6 different companies represented in the game, and each company has a varying number of cards that represent stocks in that company. So, for example, the more exclusive company might only have 5 cards in the deck, while the more common company might have 10 cards in the deck. Your goal is to have the most cards of each of these companies, or as many of these companies as possible. And you do that by trading cards with other players, by discarding cards and collecting cards that are of interest to you, and also drawing cards from the deck in the hope that you'll get the cards that you need. In any game of Startups, you're only really going to have the opportunity to become the dominant owner of 2 or 3 or perhaps 4 different companies. So really it's about identifying where the opportunities are early on in the game and then being able to chase them down strategically. It's a very simple game. It takes 10 minutes to learn, but the joy of it is that it is a very complex game in terms of the way that the mechanics work against other players. So you need to be able to be very good at reading your opponents and also responding to the moment-to-moment events that are happening in the game. So you do need to be quick on your feet. You need to think quickly on your feet, excuse me. You need to be quite creative in terms of how you approach the strategy of the game. And every single game is different. You can't stick to the same strategy one game to the next. You're going to have to be flexible to be good at Startups, which means that it is an endlessly replayable game. Next up, I want to talk about Concordia, which is a game I didn't know existed until I saw it pop up on the Switch eShop. In fact, the Switch has been quite good for helping me to discover board games that I otherwise would have missed. Last year I discovered Wingspan thanks to the eShop release, and this year it is a Concordia. I do like my physical board games, but because I'm not in the hobby shop every week checking out new releases, I do tend to miss some of them, even some bigger releases. I don't know how popular Concordia is, but it seems to do well enough for itself, have a good enough reputation, and I do have a physical copy of this game on the way as well. I have enjoyed it that much. Concordia takes place during the Roman Empire, and it is one of those Euro board games where you're not directly competing with your opponents. Each person is playing an individual game, and the person that has the most victory points at the end by completing various actions is the winner. There's not too much room to mess with your opponent's games. It really is about individual strategy and how you go about dealing with the conditions of that particular game. In this one, the goal is to set up an empire, a trading empire basically. So there are a whole bunch of different boards. The one that you're seeing on the screen in front of you is of all of the Roman Empire. That's the main board. But you can play on a whole bunch of different smaller boards like Crete or Just Italy, or there's a lot more that are going to be released via DLC as well. But whichever board you do play on, what you're going to do is send settlers around to the various key locations, and in those key locations you're going to build cities. Once you've done that, you can start collecting resources from those cities, which you use to build more cities, to collect more resources, to get more settlers, and eventually start buying some cards that give you victory points as well. It is a very simple game to learn. It takes about 15 minutes to run through the game's tutorial, but there is a lot of complexity to this one. And actually mastering it and even defeating the AI takes a little bit of practice. So it is one of those ones where there There are multiple layers of strategy you need to be considering at each time, and on your turn, each turn you only get one action, and using the turns in the right order, using the actions in the right order, will determine how well you play. On the Switch, I do need to mention just briefly, there are some stability issues, at least they have been so far. They may well be patched out. I have had a couple of crashes, but overall the game is presented really nicely. There is just enough animation in there that it feels like it is a video game rather than a fairly static board game. But if you do then go and decide to play the physical board game, you'll have all the tools that you need to enjoy that based on your experience from the Switch game. So finally for this video, I want to talk about Rich Man 10, and I'll probably spend the most time in this video talking about this game because it is the most curious of the releases. It is the one that has, in many ways, impressed me the most. It came out of nowhere. It's very poorly translated. You do need to be an existing fan of board games to understand what the heck is going on. But if you do get into it, you realize that it is inspired by Fortune Street or Boom Street, depending on the part of the world that you're from, to the point that it is almost a clone of it. And that is a really good thing. I've been asking for a new Fortune Street or Boom Street for a very long time now. To have this game come out of nowhere to give me that has been a nice start to 2022. So for people who don't know, Fortune Street or Boom Street is a Square Enix property. It's actually called Itadaki Street in Japan, and it has been around for a very long time. It is a series of board games that is basically like Monopoly, where you go around a map buying up properties, and when people land on those properties, they pay you rent. But there's a whole extra layer to Itadaki Street that gives it a texture that takes it well beyond Monopoly. There's a stock market, and you can buy stock, and that stock market fluctuates up and down just like a real world stock market does, and you can then use that money and potentially profit to buy more stuff. And that additional layer takes some of the random luck out of Monopoly, so it's not just about buying the best properties, it's also about how you're able to manipulate the stock market to make sure that you're making profit there as well. Rich Man 10 does that same kind of thing. There is a stock market in Rich Man 10, and the basic gameplay pretty much works exactly the same way. You roll the dice, you move around the boards, you collect properties, and then you also buy stock. This one has a number of cards as well. Those add additional random elements in there, and they can change the game. Some cards allow you to acquire opponents' properties. Other cards allow you to lay down traps. Some cards allow you to reverse your movement. So you can be very strategic about how you make your way around the board if you use those cards well. But the goal remains basically the same otherwise, and the only real difference is the lack of a license. So Itadaki Street in Japan and Fortune Street and Boom Street and whatever has generally been licensed to the Square Enix characters. Well, it's not really licensed since it is a Square Enix thing. They generally use their characters from Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest to spice the action up for people that are fans of those series. The only time we've had a Fortune Street released in the West, and again, it was called Fortune Street or Boom Street, depending on your part of the world, was a time where Nintendo collaborated with Square Enix to do a Dragon Quest Mario crossover, which was just a lot of fun. It was released on the Wii. I don't think it sold particularly well, but it was by far the most played Wii game that we had in our household because we just love that game so much. It is the kind of game that, even though it is superficially similar to Monopoly, people who don't like Monopoly still enjoy this one. I know for a fact, because a couple of my friends who are not fans of Monopoly at all still love what Fortune Street did. So to have that again in Rich Man 10 on the Switch, it came out of nowhere. It's certainly very, very appreciated, and I'm going to get a lot of play out of this one. As humble as it looks, and without the Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy and Mario licenses, it is still the same core game, and that is a delight. There's also an awful lot of maps on there, dozens of maps, so you definitely get your money's worth when you get into this game. Anyway, that's enough of this video. Do let me know your own thoughts in the comments. If you're a fan of board games, what are you playing at the moment? Are any of these three on the agenda? If you haven't heard of Rich Man 10, don't be surprised. It did drop out of nowhere. I don't think I've seen anyone talk about it anywhere, but go and check it out on the eShop. You may just find a new favorite game on your console. All right, thanks very much for tuning in. Do mash that like and subscribe button if you enjoy what we do. That way you don't miss any of our videos. And if you want to support what we're doing with digitallydownloaded.net, please do consider throwing us $1 or so on Patreon. If you do so, you do get a magazine as well, and that magazine each month is 56 pages, if not more, maybe more towards the end of the year. At the moment, it's 56 pages, and we do everything. We do video games, but also film, music, literature, Japanese food, Japanese travel, culture. It is a magazine for people that enjoy Japan as a thing and want to know a little bit more about the country where a lot of our favorite games come from. So that's a bonus for just backing us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. All right, everyone, have a good one. Enjoy the board games, and we'll see you at the next video.